just a really simple thing. And so our feelings about governance is that if it's done well, it's almost entirely invisible, but it's accountable and transparent. So here's the thing, is that within our package, we've got these 7 integrated functions. They're integrated so you don't have to manage those 7 integrations. That's the idea. The communities, man, they're not going to bring on an IT architect that's going to have 7 different software packages and manage those integrations.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Gordon and I were on a roll last night talking about this.
I can share a bit from my perspective as well. Like, it's very interesting to look at it in the context and how the latest developments in technology can help us facilitate this vision, this dream, and make it a reality. For example, many of you know that blockchain technology has just exploded, like in recent years, and a lot of people actually connected to cryptocurrency, and that's one use of it. But actually, the blockchain technology is much more powerful because it allows transparency and accountability. So exactly what Kent was talking about, like this governance or reputation model, like it can, the blockchain technology plays an integral part in it because it's like accountability built in, it's transparency built in. You can definitely see if Kent or did not like clean them. You can even see when he did it and how he did it. And there is another word here, immutability, which means that, hey, Kent can cheat. If he did his job, he's gonna get rewarded, and it even connects with each other. You see, when a person gets rewarded, the reputation system gets activated, so it just makes sense. If you guys think about, like how people today trying to change something, well, what do? They sign a petition. You get like 1,000 signatures, 1 million signatures, and what gets done, Like when you think about it, 1 million people signed to do something, they have the idea, they have the agreement about what needs to be done, but where is the, you have the call to action, but you can't make the action happen. Why? Because the tools are not there, You can't gather all of these people, to go and do their part. You can't collect this whole thing. The infrastructure is not there. So what we are trying to do at 214 Alpha is that when your community has the idea, like when it has the people who actually want to do that, like Ken said, the money is there, the idea is there, the result is there, It's just the infrastructure to facilitate it and to make it happen. And we provide, we manage them so that you don't have to care about all of these like 10 different software integrations together, We make it smooth, we make it simple. And even more importantly, we customize it for the needs of the community. Because if you take the example of India, if you take the example of different cultures, different, like different religions even, like, hey, they have different customs there. You don't want to step on their traditions, you don't want to tell them, no, you do things our way. And that's exactly what the big companies are telling them to do, You're either going to do it our way or you're not going to do it at all,
Right.
A lot of them don't use them.
Yeah, no, I mean, seriously, that's like a modern day version of the company store, right? Like back in the day, so my family were Western expansionists, right? Like, all of my people came into the New World by the 1630s, and they worked their way across the West. And over again, they end up in some mining town or some logging town, and they'd earn a minimal amount of money. Then they had to buy from the company store, which made them de facto slaves, right? So that's an example of a walled garden, exclusive community, and you have to work by their rules, and it robs you, and that money never comes back. That's exactly what goes on when you use someone else's commerce platform or something like that. That money never comes back to your community. And to me, that's unacceptable, right? I just drove from Portland to Austin. So that's, half of North America, right? I did it with Florian, who's our CTO from Germany. And, he made the superfluous statement, wow, America's big, which is like an understatement, right? But what's really important is there's thousands of small communities from here to there, right? And I lived in a small community when I was a kid. I lived in Astoria, mouth of the Columbia, the oldest town west of the Mississippi. It was, it's where John Jacob Astor, it's named after John Jacob Astor, and it's where Lewis and Clark landed when they did a survey for the Louisiana Purchase. And so when you're in a town like that, it kind of, it's the exact, like, it's like the furthest, I call it the ragged edge of Western civilization as it spills into the Pacific. That's like what it is, right? So in those towns, like in all those little towns, they had recognized early that as you get these large centralized stores, they drop their establishments in there, and then that money is pulled out of the community and it never comes back. There's not an equitable exchange between how much profit they get and how much they bring back in wages. And so what I had watched is, Astoria had tried to do, a buy Astoria first token system, which is a pretty good idea if you think about it. There's only 10,000 people there, and most of the people there are spending money in the town. So that money is there, right? That money's there. And it doesn't need to have, 10% of it sucked out of the town and sent to Jersey City, right? So So what they would do is try to put together an incentivation, try to incentivize people to actually use this essentially proprietary closed economy currency. And there's a precedent for that. There used to be the frontier banks and stuff like that. And people will argue, well, the frontier banks failed. That's true because the centralized bank dominated, and the centralized bank now is sucking money out of the local communities. So as I would describe to Florian, a couple generations ago, you saw Main Street change. It turned from stores that were actually craftspeople to turning into consignment shops because people were selling what they had to make a few extra dollars so they could take care of their kids and stuff like that. And that's changed. The consignment shops aren't on Main Street anymore. They ends up being Dollar Tree or Dollar General, whatever, which ends up being like an awful reversal. Is they end up being still a centralized institution selling things for $1 to people who are in an impoverished state. So, you can't go to those communities and say, I'm going to sell you a solution because I'm in Silicon Valley and we're going to basically take 10% of your transaction fees and you'll never see it again. Man, those people have closed ranks. They're like this. We're not doing that anymore, right? They're just sick of it. So, as Borjan had indicated, we use a high trust transaction fabric. We use a private blockchain. We're actually using Hyperledger as far as that goes. And it's not that we don't do public blockchain, but we found a few things. Like one of them is that and this merits a different discussion, but people don't want their transactions reverse engineered by people who aren't part of their community. Like that's one thing, right? So they do want that privacy, and they also want the performance. And that is a trade-off. You're not going to have a million nodes checking the ledger, but I mean, we had built the Pangea platform on Ethereum and learned with bitter experience that there's a lot of insufficient capability of that architecture. So we actually went to private blockchain. But anyway,
I actually can share some few words about
yeah,
this.
well, you're the blockchain architect. I'm just a CEO. What do I know? Right.
Like Ken said, like we are actually exploring a lot of blockchain solutions, one of which is like Hyperledger. Actually, the specifics are not that relevant necessarily. What's more important is to understand one thing, that a whole community, a whole, like high transaction output economy, which is breathing and thriving, is never going to live on a public blockchain, solely on a public blockchain. They're still useful for ensuring, like global trust and everything. So they can be used in part for some aspects of the system, but as Ken said, like the transaction, you want privacy, within your community. You don't want like the other city to be able to know who spends the money where, and how, it creates unfair advantage, and it also introduces the possibility for bad actors. Essentially, all of this is already happening, like people are exchanging their goods and services between themselves. If you think about a neighbor, like making a deal with his other neighbor, but technology can just like help spread this, a bit further, even if you don't know the neighbor, but he lives across the street, like you can freely trade with him because you're both part of the same community. You can check his identity, his reputation, you can even make more friends through this because, hey, when the transactions are there, people a lot of time try to do good, it's just this gap is what's preventing them. And if technology is actually able to bridge this gap, it actually increases all of the good values within humanity, like you're able to make more friends, the community is thriving better, you have this brotherhood, sisterhood, like it just flows the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just moved here a few weeks ago, and I don't know anybody in the neighborhood. And so nobody here knows the social equity that I had built up in Portland. I'm a handy guy. I know how to work on cars, and I like I like to do home repair. I like doing hard work, actually, hard physical work. So I signed up on Nextdoor, which is actually a pretty good example of a site that facilitates relationships within a local area. It's actually, you got to be able to verify that you live in a house and all that other stuff. And then I just, introduced my family, and then I said, I'm looking for side projects, right? So I helped a woman take stuff to the dump after her husband died, and that was cool. Actually, we got a chance to talk. And there's a guy named Leonard who's a fellow veteran, and he has an old Ford van that I'm going to work on because I used to be an auto mechanic. And so and then we got invited to a barbecue, and a guy spent a whole day doing brisket. And so I got to know other guys. There's two guys that are trying to get this motorcycle resurrected, and I'd love to work on bikes, right? So that sort of thing is cool. So I have two beefs with Nextdoor. One of them is that it completely doesn't acknowledge the contributions of those who don't happen to live indoors. And, we call them the houseless. I love those people, man. That's where you'll find me. You find me down in Rumberg and Lamar, just sitting on a curb with people and, talking, because those are my people, right? And they have a lot of value. They have a lot to contribute, and you're not going to get in Nextdoor because, because you're not in a house. And as a consequence, that creates what I would consider an artificial division between those who are indoors and those who aren't. And so the people next door are like, oh, I'm scared of the homeless, man. Just go out and talk to them. They're just people, right? The other thing is that I have a global community to which I belong. I'm not limited to this neighborhood, and I want to be able to use the benefits of that actually extend. I have a friend, actually, he was my best friend in high school and a best man in my wedding, and he's actually houseless, and he's doing data mining, and I won't say what it is because it's a pretty good project, but it would be to benefit houseless, and he's working on another project, Art for Survival, which is how can the people that are houseless leverage their artistic ability to achieve some basic self-sufficiency and dignity. And these are communities, these are overlapping communities. But one thing I was going to say is that I want to be able to say I'm part of that community. I want to be able to then use a high trust transaction platform. And so one of the benefits of blockchain is it facilitates high trust between strangers, which is true, right? And that actually, if you look at the design of our platform, it is designed to mitigate fraud, right? And just as a personal background, and you can look this up, I did information security and anti-fraud for a lot of years. In my most recent assignment, I worked for a company called Arbitration that actively monitors almost 4 billion devices every day. So, if you're doing anything e-commerce related, which includes, people that are in the gambling industry, that'll definitely get their attention, because Arbitration is a real pain in their ass, because, they do a great job of identifying fraud behaviors. And I was responsible for device fingerprinting and some of the fraud algorithms. And it would be, essentially a way to identify fraud behaviors within milliseconds, and this is across a vast transaction volume. And so a lot of the things that I have learned between information security, anti-hacker, and trying to mitigate internal theft and fraud and all that other stuff is built into the platform we've got. What you do to use that high trust message platform is you pay for it, because this is what you do when you use Facebook Marketplace or anything else like that. Like, not so much Facebook Marketplace, you do, because they basically sell your personal information for advertising purposes. But if you're using, Amazon or eBay or something like that, that money is spent and then it never comes back to your community. So here's the thing, that this is one thing that we're different, right, is that we manage all those integrations so you don't have to. So all you have to do is focus on your community, right? So if you're, a small town in the middle of New Mexico, and you're like, enough, we're sick of taking that money out. What we want to do is we're going to draw this circle. This is our community. We're going to buy this town first, right? Like, do this first. We'll do that. And in fact, you get to put your face on the product. So it looks like you built the product. We private label. So whatever the name of your community is, or the name of your town, it just looks like you built the thing, right? And then we just become the provider. And we integrate all of that stuff, so you don't have to. And it's, mobile app. You don't have to run any IT infrastructure. That's another benefit. You don't need any computer guys. We do all that. But here's the biggest thing. I think the most important thing is that those transaction fees, a pretty healthy chunk of that is shared back with the community. And it's done in such a way that the platform itself becomes a profit center. So that might be a little bit much for some people. That's hard for them to get their head around. eBay is a profitable company. So when you use eBay, you're auctioning your high value stuff to other people, and then you're paying eBay for the use of that platform, right? You never see that money again. Your community could technically use that same ability. You could technically set up your own town or regional or vegan, man, it doesn't matter what your community is. You could set up your own version of an eBay capability, but that money comes back to the community. So you end up getting that community. And so within your governance model, you might choose to use that money to add greater benefit to the community.
Whatever you want.
Sorry?
Yeah, I was saying to build a bridge or whatever you need.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. The reason that we split some of that with you is that now we have a financial best interest for you to diversify your economy, if you think about it, right? Because it becomes part of our financial portfolio as 214. So what we have as customer services look a lot more like business analysts. So as we work with the community, and you can actually, the conversations we're having with our customer seed now is actually one of those things, is that a lot of our conversations are actually high fidelity conversations that fall in the context of business analyst work that like IBM would charge tons of money for, right? But what I'm doing is giving my expertise away because it's actually in our financial best interest for them to become successful. And in that context, they're not trying to be a profitable entity. They're trying to do is to help. These communities have valuable wisdom, and for seed, the communities have valuable wisdom in the stewardship of the land, and they want to be able to make that successful. And it might turn into something that turns into a financial success, but that's definitely not their primary interest. But we still, that's in alignment with our values, right? And this applies in America, right? Like, so I come from the West Coast. It's definitely an earthquake type of thing. There's this overdue earthquake for Oregon. It's like 80 years or so, 80, 100 years overdue, and it's usually devastating, happens about every 300 years. So it's sort of this, the Cascadia subduction zone sort of nightmare scenario. And so the people that are in their big houses and are freaked out about the homeless might be surprised to learn that the homeless are actually pretty smart about how to turn plants into food so you don't starve to death, right? So that's a great example of what could be a pretty good collaboration. And you could find a middle ground there by putting together seed banks and urban forestry stewardships or whatever that actually could close that gap. And there's a lot of really great applications of this sort of thing. We're finding some interest within the indigenous community as well. I mean, they have a wealth of ideas, but the point is that in order to use the platform, you're going to have to spend something on it. And there's a pragmatic reason to do that too. If you make transactions free, people will overload the system and completely crash it. That's like the distributed denial of service, for example. That's when you hear
Yes.
DDoS, that's what they're doing. They get to run 1 million transactions. It costs them nothing. With blockchain, you got to spend money to get a transaction, and it basically takes out the financial incentive for someone to try to bring the system to its knees. Because, I mean, unless you can pay me, that's great. You're going to pay us a ton of money to run that transaction. You just generate a bunch of revenue that goes to the community. So congratulations on your donations, right? That's basically how it plays out. So, so this is the really cool thing is that you get a private label pre-integrated package, so you don't have to manage those integrations. You don't have to bring an IT guy on board. And I would argue that a community that is already kind of established, they already have their IT guy. There's already a guy that's saying, person who's doing, okay, well, we've got the Google Docs share, and we're using Telegram, and we're doing this and this and this. They're already using a bunch of different packages, right? But the Telegram channel has 200 people in there, and there's one guy who posts 60 things a day, it's just like all that stuff, right? So we put all that within a single package. It's got your name on it, not ours, so you look like you did it. You get the transaction-based revenue, which turns into a profit center. And then our support team actually helps you diversify that. So you get a low variability, a highly diversified economy that you can use for job creation, which, if it sounds like self-governance, it's exactly what it is. It's like literally what it is. And it works for, private entities, or it works with public entities. It doesn't matter to us. I would just like to see a lot less fraud and a lot more, self-sufficiency, creating solutions from the bottom that extrapolate upwards. That's sort of my vision on this thing. And it has a transparent and accountable quality to the architecture. Like one of the architects, Andrew, wrote me and says, I want to see our finance